This is the prize fight of our panels. This is Detroit versus Silicon Valley. Who wins? Knocked down how many rounds? And our moderator today is perfectly suited for this. Paul Lienert. Let me just say a couple of words about Paul. Paul is the future transportation correspondent for Reuters, knows this industry upside down, and he was able to persuade Reuters to give him a dual assignment to Detroit and Palo Alto. So no better person to helm this panel than Paul. Enjoy, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me back there? Okay, so I don't have to, I can even hear myself. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to give you about 30 seconds of my own thoughts about what I think some of you may be interested in hearing today and what I hope to discuss with our expert panelists here today. We didn't pick the topic, we find it intriguing, so we'll see where the conversation takes us, right? It's a provocative title. Maybe we'll focus a little bit less on winners and losers and take a look at the larger picture, okay? I would like to think we're going to talk today not about the future of the automotive industry per se, but a much broader and deeper topic. And it's a topic that ultimately will affect all of our lives, whether you're in the automotive business or not. And that's basically the future of transportation. And by that, I mean specifically the transport of people and goods. This future transportation business, and you'll hear us talk about some of this today, is going to take many forms. It's going to probably employ at least as many different models as it does today, and some new ones, perhaps ones that we haven't even figured out yet. I'm thinking in terms of automated aerial vehicles, drones, as you might know them, which are, at least as far as their ability to carry people and goods, are still in their infancy, but they're attracting an enormous amount of investment right now, particularly from venture capital, including automotive venture capital, by the way. So our panelists are going to share their views on how all this may shake out over the next 5, 10, even 20 years. Our crystal balls are probably no better than yours, but we have a lot of fun talking about this kinds of stuff, right? So during the course of the discussion, maybe we'll identify some potential winners and losers. I would merely remind us that we're not talking about a sprint, it's a marathon, and a marathon produces some unusual finishers, let's put it that way, including some folks who tend to come out of nowhere, right? Dark horses, or people people in this case, companies that may not even be around today. So I want to introduce our panelists. I'll give each one of them a minute or two to talk about what they do, why they're here, and maybe an issue that's foremost in their minds. I'll start at the far end with the one and only Alex Roy, who is founder of the Human Driving Association, and you have to make sure you ask Alex after this discussion to tell you all about the Human Driving Association, right?
Why don't we talk about it right now?
No, you can talk about it right now. Rachel Nguyen, who is the director of Future Lab for Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi. Russell Hensley, who's senior leader for the global automotive and assembly practice at McKinsey. Alex, you're based up in the Bay Area, are you?
New York.
Oh, New York, excuse me. Rachel, you're in LA?
Los Angeles.
Russell, you're in Detroit? And I'm from the boonies. I'm a farm boy from out in the country. So, Alex, can you give us a kind of a quick hit on who you are and what you do?
I'm an occasional angel investor in the transportation sector. I'm an editor at Time Inc. In transportation. I write op-eds that are very feisty about self-driving technologies. I'm absolutely convinced that autonomy is inevitable, but that it will not be binary and will not overtake human-controlled vehicles. And the Human Driving Association is a lobby and safety organization that recognizes that within the inevitability, despite the inevitability of autonomy, that there remain systems yet to be developed that don't replace humans but enhance their capabilities driving cars. And we are opposed to almost all the messaging from the autonomous and mobility sector.
I have a feeling it's going to be an interesting discussion. Rachel,
I almost want to jump in right now.
but first things first.
Okay, so maybe a little bit of background as to what I've done, because it really informs my perspective and the work that I do today. So I've been in the auto industry remarkably 18 years. I did not expect it would be that long of a journey for me. Really my background is in psychology, organizational psychology, so it helps me in many ways deal with the local climates in these organizations. But I really have spent most of my career in a group called Advanced Planning, which is part of product planning. So for a good 10 years, I worked on what's going to happen in consumers' lives 5 years from now so that we could develop a car that would suit their needs and really be differentiated in the marketplace and appeal to their functional and emotional needs. And so I have touched part of a lot of Nissan and Infiniti vehicles. And then through the course of that and thinking about the longer term and studying human or customer trends, this idea of ownership is really what first changed. And not necessarily in the US, in other cultures, the idea of owning a vehicle, and we've talked about it a lot in the younger generations, it just wasn't, the challenges of owning outweighed the benefits of it. So we started studying that, and ultimately about around 2010 realized, okay, we need to be thinking about something beyond product, and it was as easy as that. What else can we be doing? And so where I got to today is in Future Lab. It's not a gigantic scientific lab. It's literally 5 people, cross-discipline. I have a person in Paris, I have a person in Tokyo, I have an urban planner, I have industrial designers, myself as the sort of social scientist, I have a finance person. And we think about what are from the end user perspective. So I use a lot of what I did in advanced planning about understanding where people are at and what their needs are and unmet needs. And now we apply it to this bigger world of mobility. And we think about it at multiple levels, the system level that everybody talked about, but most of our work is down in the studying anthropological looks at what is changing for people, what are their modes, what would cause them to change. And I can tell you that it's not going to be just a lower price. So anyway, we're trying to also bridge between the methods of a startup or a Silicon Valley company and the methods of an OEM. And we're sort of finding our way to really solve real problems to get us into what could be the future for people and utilizing our technologies and our vehicles in that capacity. I'll stop
cool.
there.
No, I don't hear too much of that kind of spiel in Detroit, I'll tell you. So that's very cool. Russell.
Good afternoon. I'm Russell Hensley. I'm a partner with McKinsey. I'm based in Detroit. Whether I'm defending Detroit today, I don't know. Paul, you can decide that. Been in the auto industry.
Liverpool.
I'll defend
okay.
Liverpool today. We're going to the Champions League final. That's very good. If anybody is tuned into soccer, whatever we call it here. But I've been in the auto industry about 25 years. I spent 10 years with Ford launching cars around the world, and then a couple of years with Ricardo designing engines, internal combustion engines. And then shifted to consulting, got an MBA at Michigan and moved to McKinsey 15 years ago as an automotive guy, and I've been doing automotive since. And it's a combination of serving both OEMs, traditional OEMs, suppliers, also folks that are peripheral to the industry, whether it's insurance companies that are trying to understand what's going on at the moment, or folks that may have a whole host of retail gasoline plants or oil refineries or the like. But basically within the firm we get this kind of wonderful view and opportunity to serve clients across a multitude of industries that actually touch transportation, mobility, or automotive, as we call it. I think it's an incredible time right now. Not wanting to sound crass, but if you think of the situation that we have today, I'm not sure how many people came by car. Probably the vast majority. If anybody didn't come by car, can they stand up? Okay. Did you walk? He walked from the hotel, okay. We have a good joker in the crowd, that's wonderful. So one person walked, which is terrific, but the vast majority came by car. Did anybody have a crash? If you did, can you stand up if you can? Did anybody break down? We've got a pretty reliable solution. I think that's testimony.
The crash people aren't here to
The crash people aren't here,
How
of
about near
course,
crashes?
Alex.
I was following
the broken
Waze.
down people aren't here to represent themselves.
Exactly.
exactly.
They can phone in. But basically, we've got a pretty reliable solution. That's the situation. Problem is, cars are utilized, less than 4% of the time. Problem is, we find 3% of what we put in the gas tank in terms of energy actually meets the road. Problem is, we spend $300 billion a year in the U.S. on safety, or basically, accidents and basically cleaning things up. We've got challenges, but we've also got huge opportunities to resolve that with autonomy that may well, address that $300 billion. We'll see whether it's partial autonomy or full autonomy. We've got connectivity, so vehicles will be able to talk to each other as they do today. We'll be able to talk to the infrastructure, we'll be able to talk to people. We've got electrification, which has an opportunity to increase the efficiency by which we put power in and basically put it down through our tires to the road, and ideally doing that in a cleaner way. All depends on where the energy is coming from. And we've got shared mobility, which can have a significant impact on the 96% of the time that vehicles aren't basically used. So we're at a time now where we've got a whole host of potential solutions that, as we were saying to Paul just in the preamble, the strategies that the strategic muscle for automotive industries is not, it's a relatively new muscle. It's not been around, and it probably wasn't used, from 1885 till about 2010, really. But it's in full flow right now, and again, it's strategy, but there's enormous uncertainty. And again, we would frame this as it's classic strategy under uncertainty, and you have to understand the uncertainty before you begin to make your strategic moves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank all of you for kind of setting us up for the discussion. So I figure I'm going to start with kind of a softball question. And I'm going to kind of work my way backwards, if you don't mind. I figured you'd be the one who'd want to start, okay? So let's just set aside for a moment the issue of winners and losers, and here's my softball question. What does the transportation industry look like in 2030? Not the auto business, but the transportation industry, and how is it fundamentally going to be different from today, if it is?
All right, to be fair, I'm not a transportation expert.
Okay.
Beyond wheeled vehicles, and I really think that the two of you would be better suited to answer that question first. I will say this, that we will not see flying taxis anywhere in a major urban area in the United States, or probably anywhere in the first world, for decades. And anyone who comes to me and suggests that we will is not an engineer. They probably work in marketing.
Or Hollywood.
Or they're a consultant. Or they're a CGI animator. And anyone who brings that up is a fool or worse.
And with that kind of low ball a response, I'd love to hear what you have to think about this, Rachel.
I hope that's true, because I like my airspace. So I think, so 2030, if you look at some of what the consultants have put out, and I have done this exercise where I've tried to actually take them all and figure out where are they saying this actually starts to take off, and it's a wild gamut. But by 2030, they are predicting that we are underway in having many autonomous vehicles out on the road. So I hope that we've figured out that from a transportation system, and I'm not an expert in that either, but I am coming up that learning curve over the last 4 years in that. But that sort of the best use is going to be in supporting transit. So there isn't much transit. in the U.S., but in terms of rail, I mean, LA is building, so it'd be a great place to figure out how this works. But, how do we support some of the commuting population would be the easiest. So first, last mile solutions, I think the easier ones to handle first. So hopefully we'll see, either small pods or big shuttles taking people on, defined routes or dynamic routes on certain geospaced areas. I think that's going to be the easiest. Now, all the other, use cases, there's, a lot of great need for people that are older and shut in many populations to be able to access, healthcare or, anything in their lives. So I hope that we're also, tackling and have figured out how to reach people in remote areas with something that's, efficient and safe for them to get, improve their quality of life. I mean, for me, I hope we all have a better quality of life and have more options.
Okay.
And those are the two I would say we maybe have figured out by then.
Okay. Russell,
yes?
Well, Russell, we had a bit of a discussion about this earlier, backstage, but do you think transportation in 2030 will look radically different from what it looks like today? And if so, what areas would make it so?
It probably depends where you are in the world. And I think, sometimes we're a wee bit myopic in looking at the market that we exist in today. But if we just take that as an example, again, if you think about the trends, not just autonomy is going to be, it will be of significance at some point in time. I think, Alex, we were talking about some of the timelines that we've thought about where you've got this kind of robotaxi 1.0 in this, the next couple of years. You're probably somewhere between 2020 and 2025. You've got a kind of a second version of that, and 2025 plus you've got kind of the third version of that, the third version being something that can be probably close to level 5. Now,
hold on a minute.
No, just 1 second. You hold on a minute, and then you can speak. Right. The question is just in kind of what kind of volumes, do you see? And whether it's autonomy, whether it's electrification, you have this very natural momentum of the industry where, on a good day, we're flowing at 17 million units, 17.5 million units. Paul, you'll have the exact numbers of new vehicle sales going into a pool of 235 million. It's going to take 11, 12, 13 years for that fleet to turn over, even if we sold 100% of that new product today. So it's still going to be very, very small. So, we'll see changes in the product. They will become a lot cleaner. They will become a lot, electric probably will be, the 15, 20% of new vehicle sales, maybe a little bit more if shared mobility and electrics get together along with autonomy. But it's still going to be very gradual. I would say the bigger change is probably going to happen on the business model as opposed to the product. So the product we're going to see change, yes, we know it. The technology, we know where it is. We know where the regulations are, or we have a reasonable idea. Things may be delayed a little bit here. But those are forcing change. It's technology, it's regulation, to be honest. It's not the consumer pulling for autonomous vehicles or for electrics at this point. But that may well come. Things, if you look overseas, if you go to Europe, it's more advanced. The regulators are more stringent. If you go over to China, then it's quite a different equation. Any vehicle sold over the 28 million threshold is going to be electric, which kind of dictates that they're going to have quite a significant volume of electrics, which will pick up quite significantly post 2025, or that's the belief. Exactly to Paul's point, there's no future facts. There's no crystal ball that I've got that's better than yours. We try to understand drivers and try to, again, play games with those drivers, understanding what's 10% probable, what's 90% probable, and look at the bounds of what the future may be. But Alex, please.
Thank you. Thank you for making my argument for me regarding the turnover of vehicles, because it is true, if 100% of vehicles sold tomorrow were level 5 capable, it would still take 25 some odd years in this country to see total ubiquity. I'd like to go back to your original point about connectivity, autonomy, sharing, and electrification, because the majority of messaging coming out of Silicon Valley, which has been co-opted by the OEMs who are terrified of their stock valuations, has been this belief that this CASE model, the 4 legs of future mobility, and mobility is almost a meaningless term because we are mobile now and humans are autonomous now. So mobility and autonomy are really new words for third parties to monetize what we already do in different forms. And so if you think about human psychology, there is absolutely no need for more connectivity except as a functionality of new mobility models, which there is some argument to be made that people do enjoy ride-hailing, and there is some argument to be made about sharing. And in some places like Norway, where it's heavily subsidized electrification, and I do believe that autonomous vehicles are inevitable. But the definition of autonomous is so vague as to be irrelevant. Almost anything on the road today that has a mild lane-keeping system is called autonomous. In reality, we need a new word for it in order for people to understand what we're talking about.
And that word might be?
Geo-autonomous.
There you go.
No product is of any value to anyone if no one will pay for it. So the first vehicles we all anticipate will be Waymo vehicles. And it's not a coincidence they're being deployed in the easiest place, a low impact, low density, perfect weather periphery of a secondary American city in Arizona.
That sounds like Phoenix, yeah.
Yeah, funny, it is Phoenix. So if you look at that and then you extrapolate out against the 4 legs of the mobility argument, connectivity, autonomy, sharing, electrification, there's no reason for these things to be glued together except in the minds of marketers. There is an argument, a moral argument to be made for automation and safety, absolutely. But billions, trillions, and wars have been lost betting against human nature and social engineering. Now, I don't consider myself a libertarian or even very conservative, but a study of human nature suggests that people do not care about safety. They really don't. They don't. Because if they did, we wouldn't have distracted driving as we know it. We would have mandated seatbelt interlocks, people would be rioting in the streets, because every day we have the equivalent of 4 or 5 Parkland massacres, every day in cars, and literally no one cares. So
it sounds to me like you've got about 3 or 4 columns already written.
I do.
No. Okay.
Wait, can I jump in here?
Please do.
Okay, good.
Please. Thank you.
So it seems though that do we only get one option in this country for getting around? Is that my human potential is to just drive a car? I mean, that's my only option, and that's not me acting on my human nature. That's me working within the confines of how this country has been built. So, I mean, I feel like that we can offer them with this technology, we can offer more options, basically. And so autonomy is the tool that can rid some societal issues, right? Electrified helps with pollution, right? Autonomy helps with congestion, right? And access, and for people that can't drive. So it's not one or the other, right? So it's finding the ways in which that technology can be harnessed that actually delivers a better, again, quality of life for people, so that they have more options and more of their human potential is realized. So even just in my case, I would prefer to take my kids to school and not be distracted by driving. I would rather be able to spend that time with them, and instead they're the distraction for me now. Even just that little simple place of where people could have a better life, right? And that's just my own world, which isn't even that difficult, right? So people getting to jobs, having better transportation solutions, it can be part of that, and we should use that technology in that way. I'm not saying it's an absolute, but I wouldn't discount it and say it's against sort of human potential, which I think is what you were saying.
To a degree, I'm not opposed to multimodal solutions. I live in New York City,
right.
So I choose
you get the benefit
not to drive most of the time. It's the worst place in the world to drive outside of India. But an organization, maybe not yours, but definitely an organization like yours, I did a study recently, I can't recall who it was, stating that in order to reap the benefits of autonomy, not safety benefits, the traffic reduction required anywhere from 50 to 90% penetration of vehicles within a given geofenced area. Is that true?
I didn't write the study, so I don't exactly I don't have a direct answer for that, Alex. I think one of the things that is very key to this discussion. I think if you're going to go into those areas like Phoenix or wherever they would be, again where you've got that wonderful conditions, the point is that they also have to be clean solutions. So again, I don't think you can talk about autonomy in isolation. Again, I think the solution has to be clean. It has to be, and as of now, right, the clean solution is electric. We don't seem to be able to find any other viable solutions, and electrics have had the benefit of investments in lithium ion since '95 of about 3 to 5 billion every year in terms of R&D. So again, you have to look at an integrated solution, and the cities are also provoking this again with the regulations. And again, it's not just within the US. If you look at some of the regulation within the cities around Europe and China, in terms of what is going to be allowed into the city and not. So again, I think the future is more around it is an integrated solution. Autonomy gets great benefits to folks that struggle with mobility today for whatever reason. Ride sharing is something that is, again, making opportunities for some folks that really struggle in getting even from home to work. Shared mobility is an e-hailing is actually creating opportunities. There's some specific cases in Detroit where people are actually able to get to work now and are able to work. So again, I think there's a bundle of solutions here that actually work together.
That's a great segue. Rachel, if I can direct this question to you. And I want to shift the discussion a little bit away from technology and systems and maybe back toward business cases and use cases, business models and use cases. So the expectation is that we're starting to transition to some different use cases, right?
Yep.
And we can name a bunch of them now, and there probably will be more in the future. I'm curious, who do you expect will kind of lead us into this new era of transportation with more multimodal in some cases, but more diverse ways to use vehicles, whether they're automated, whether they're electrified or not? Is it going to be the existing car companies who do that? Is it going to be tech companies? Who is going to be at the forefront of this?
Probably all of the above.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't think we can say who. So somebody earlier in another panel, the LA one, was talking about process. So for me, it's whoever is working across stakeholders. So working with cities directly, working with tech companies, working with the vehicle providers that are solving real today issues, right? To figure out what is the sort of the trifecta of, creating a business model that works. So that's, asset utilization sort of at a high level, making sure that thing is used a lot, to, what kind of policies cities need to institute to support that, and then are you going to get the behavioral change from people to actually have them freely make that choice over time, because it's a convenient solution. So if you're not working through those issues together, and that's not an easy thing to say to do, but I think that's the things that I look for now are things that are involving those stakeholders together to solve real people's problems today before we get to autonomy.
Okay.
Because there's so much can be done today before we get to autonomy.
Alex, do you want to?
So badly.
I just
So
had
badly.
a sense. Please.
I'm going to take Silicon Valley's side here. I can't believe I will. But as someone who's always hunting for startups in the sector that solve problems and resolve use cases, there are the majority of solutions that have come out of mobility that means something, like Uber, much as we hate them, were the result of move fast, break things, ignore all context. And despite all the wretched and terrible mistakes Uber has made, they still own 70% of the market in this country. And Lyft has done almost everything correctly, and they own 30%. And so The one great definition of mobility comes from the movie Fifth Element, the multipass.
My favorite.
What do we want? I personally, no one I know cares about policy. Most of them don't even care about price. They want a multipass that allows them every mode of mobility there is. They don't care if, I'm quite sure that they don't care if drivers on the platform have hurt people. They literally, as long as it wasn't them.
But there's a big picture to all this in the long run. You have to think about the long term and what gets done today. And I think we're going through an evolution where we see what Uber did and how they did it, but that's not necessarily the way to do it, right? We're evolving from that. And I'm with you on the startup because that's why we try to find how they do it, their A/B testing, their unknowns to knowns, the way that they move fast. How do we take that and utilize that, but with an idea about where we're going with that. Because car companies are going to invest a lot of money in this. This isn't insignificant to build these vehicles and develop this technology. So it has to be both, right? And so I think you have to start small on real defined problems instead of just deploying, sort of wherever you want.
Well, I have a question specifically for you.
Okay.
Because I think I know your answer.
Okay.
For you, so I know that you must do consulting work for 2 or more large manufacturers. So in the mobility space, you have multiple companies like Uber building app platforms, and they look at the continuum, and they start acquiring companies that are adjacent in the continuum and building out this mobility, this multi-pass with multiple options. So these manufacturers, every manufacturer has attempted to make acquisitions vertically up and down the food chain, and yet not one of them. I can't think of a single manufacturer-branded app or platform that I want to use. Not Maven, not ReachNow, not MyTaxi, not Car2Go. But the horizontal platforms cutting across and coming out of Silicon Valley would seem to be the dynamic ones. So in what universe does Detroit or Stuttgart or or Japan win that battle?
Or China.
Or China.
Or China. I think that you've. I think. Let me answer it by just thinking. Looking at the last 7 years. So fact, in the ACEs or cases, whatever you want to call it, the case autonomy, connected, electric, and shared. There's been about 111 billion invested between 2010 and 2017. If you just look at the last 3 years, so 2014 to 2017, I think this is to your point, if you looked at the top 4 OEMs that will remain nameless, they've made 20 investments, of varying sizes, just the number 20. The top 2 tech companies, who you'll know, I won't mention them, we can't mention company names, but they've made 170 investments in autonomy, connected, electric, or shared. The scale of investment, and the vast majority have been around capabilities. That's one thing. So if you look at the investment, you look at the deep pockets, there's an awful lot more being spent by the tech side than there is the traditional industry. In that 111 billion, by the way, I have cheated a little bit because I've not put in there what car companies spend on platforms, which is literally big numbers of billions of dollars. The second thing I'll say is that you talk about the e-hailing companies. They have to accelerate this if they're going to survive. Right now, the business equation does not work. And the only way that you make it work is that you take some significant cost out of the equation. The significant costs that you can take out of the equation if you move towards autonomy, again, in the right setting, at whatever level it is, based on your earlier point, Alex, the only way you take the cost out is by taking the driver out or reducing the fuel costs. That's how you make the business equation work for the e-hailing companies. And yes, it's absolutely critical that they have a network across cities or a network of solutions across cities. That will be the mode. And again, you see these companies buying up, whether it's ride share, bicycle sharing or the likes. But it's out of a need to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, can I ask you a follow-on question kind of connected to this transition that we're in right now? Do you see a point in the future, whether it's 10 years out or beyond, where the physical act of manufacturing a vehicle is going to become commoditized in much the same way manufacturing a phone or manufacturing a TV became commoditized, particularly as we shift toward transportation as a service and then with ancillary services, digital services that are maybe streamed into the vehicle.
I mean, so that's what,
I deliberately asked you that question,
right.
but
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what everybody, thinks about, obviously. So, and it is a long time until that maybe is the issue. But yeah, if you're selling into fleets, it becomes a commodity. So, but there are other ways besides the sheet metal, maybe to add value to that or monetize or revenue sharing scheme. So, the idea would be, I still believe that the vehicle itself could do a better job. Right now, we're sort of misusing vehicles in these services, and I think that we could, with the information about who the end user is and how the service is being deployed, that can be beneficial to create better vehicles. So, I mean, I think going back to what you were saying, Alex, I don't know if those companies are in that to win. They're in it to be in it, right? So that they have the information about how this is going to evolve. I think that's great information for an automotive manufacturer to have, even as it feeds their long-term plans on the vehicle side. So it is all about understanding the change as it's happening. And so, I think, yes, there's part of the business that will be commoditized and you're selling into fleets, but, the more that we can create sort of added value in both the user experience inside the vehicle and the vehicle's functionality itself, can prevent that, maybe?
I have a question to that. So
No. I asked.
Okay. So every manufacturer has a performance division. Some are larger than others. As autonomy arrives, the case arrives. Once you get enough vehicles into platforms or TNCs in general that are automated, they're connected, they're everything, how does a brand prevent the entire brand from being diluted and totally commoditized to the point of literal worthlessness, regardless of volume, unless they maintain a human-driven division?
Right.
Because for 100 years, people have been sold cars on the notion of individuality, personality, freedom. And as soon as ownership goes away, an essential cathartic component is eliminated from the process of being transported. No one says, my car had an accident. We say, I had an accident, because a car becomes highly personalized, not just in how it looks, but in what we do in it, how we choose to be perceived, what we project onto it, what people project onto us. So once that is eliminated, you're taking away from people or eliminating the option of externalizing self in a way that is almost core to American mythology. And not just American mythology, the ownership of a vehicle beyond a driver's license is the equivalent rite of passage to hunting, to climbing mountains, to diving, as it was in ancient times. And more people share in common globally the act of having a driver's license, passing the test, and getting the first car, and owning a car throughout their lives than have ever shared commonality in any other cultural ritual in the history of mankind. This building is a shrine to that idea. And every single person, every friend of mine that's co-invested in any tech company collects human-driven vehicles. Someday there will be a Waymo car in this building as for fun, but not as there will be no shrine to it, in the same way that the computer museum in Mountain View is a rather small place. So
I've been there,
it would seem to me that the future, it has to include that the manufacturers that survive, and I'm quite sure there will be losers, are the manufacturers that deploy options that of both.
Yeah, so I'm with you. I spent most of my career planning vehicles for that experience for people.
Thank you.
So that they can enjoy, I enjoy driving for a while my GTR, just as much as I enjoy the one-pedal experience of an electric car. I mean, and my son knows that I work in this space, and it's like, what, I'm not gonna be able to drive? Maybe that'll actually wake up the young people when you take something away.
So you own a GTR.
I have, yeah.
Nissan will survive.
But I want to say, I don't think it's, I hope we're still making GTRs in the future. I hope there's still...
And they're not all autonomous.
Maybe they're electrified. I hope we're still... Yeah, I don't want to see that, the visceral experience of driving. But I'll tell you, it's a segment of people, though, that really enjoy that. So there is a vast amount of other people that don't. And that segment of people has dwindled. Why? Because it is no fun to drive, unfortunately, nowadays. It is just, unless you're out on a track somewhere and have that ability to do that, it's just not fun to drive. And the cost is cost prohibitive for many, many people to buy a new vehicle.
And yet your company can't manufacture enough Renault Quids for the demand in India, which is larger than the US market.
Probably.
Okay, we want to take some questions from the audience. And if anybody is ready with a question, you can jump in. In the meantime, I'm going to ask one last question of you, Russell. Oh, and never mind. I'm sorry about that, but yes, please. Identify yourself.
My name is Gus. I work in the insurance industry. So speaking of commoditized industries, if we head in the direction of 100% ownership, I can totally tell you how that works out. But my question is this: everything that I've been hearing today about the industry and where it's headed, it seems like we're rushing headlong into this vision of how it's supposed to all operate. But every time I've heard only one question so far brought up about how this is going to really truly impact people that are low income. Yep. And everything that I hear is talking about reducing the inconvenience to people that have means. And I'm wondering, from the panel here, should we, we're rushing headlong into this without asking, should we pause? Should we better understand what this is going to cause to other people? And I'm not even speaking about just the driving experience, just in general for other people.
Please.
Yeah, I don't have any answers for that, but I think the only way to actually consider that is to work with cities, because that's their stakeholder, right? So unless you have them in the room, and you're a private industry.
Are you talking about public transport, though?
I'm talking about access in general for mobility. So I feel like it's through the cities that they become a stakeholder in this whole equation, so that they're not left behind. And that we don't focus on it. So we do have a segmentation. I don't believe in customer segmentations anymore, but yeah, there's this group of people that are using ride-hailing now. They're going to be the people that are going to move to autonomy. But then there's in this country, there's a lot of people that are sort of far out of the cities that have no interest in sharing to begin with, and will never. Actually, in other countries, in Japan and Europe, the people that are far out probably are more likely to be paid attention to. In this country, those people will still have their trucks and all that, and it's going to be a mismatch. But there are segments of people that it could appeal to, but they're not going to be able to necessarily afford it. So you have to bring people that can represent them into the equation to come up with solutions for that. But I don't have those answers. I want to be able to. I think there's lots of people that I've actually met or talked to here and other places that are trying to, study that. And I think that's the only way to go, is to actually start working on that.
Russell?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely key, to the point that was made about cities. Cities, again, with all due respect to cities, it's quite difficult working with cities. Because, why do I say that? It's often difficult to find the decision makers that can make decisions across, whether it's jurisdictions or whatever it would be. But to the point, I think it absolutely starts with cities. And we did some stuff I think September 2016, we held a conference about mobility solutions that could be applied to not necessarily the masses or the the more affluent that can afford to keep their cars and drive themselves in 15, 20 years, whatever it would be. But how can you apply it to help folks, like I said earlier, that couldn't get to work? And it's the city is being given. Historically, they've had a portfolio of 1 or 2 solutions. Now they're being given a portfolio of 20 different solutions that are mobility-based. And with again, if you've got the objective function of trying to get somebody from A to B at the lowest cost, or using ride sharing, but you bundle it together and take a group of 8 people from one place to another. Some research that we did into ride sharing found that solution actually around university towns was a very, very good solution, where you could get people to walk half a block or a block at most, bundle 8 together, and they would cut their transportation costs by half. As an example. So I don't think we're going, I'd argue a little bit with your opening statement. I don't think we're, just going head on with what's a solution for the rich and famous and for the masses. I think people are thinking long and hard. I mean, Riders for Health, as an example, is one initiative where, it's kind of taken the time it takes to get vaccines or blood from one place to another. It's taken that, cut it down 20-fold, as an example.
I'm sorry, I have to address this.
Please.
Jump in. Another point Alex has to address.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
We want to leave time.
I wasn't invited here for my looks. One of the most fascinating things about transportation is that it brings wings of the left and right come together, who should have otherwise no common ground. There is a societal compact which exists in older countries, where more densely dense populations, regarding transportation and the ability to get from A to B, and transit service, bus service. In this country, because we are a new nation and we are car-based, the majority of the nation requires a car to get around. There is an equilibrium point in this country, which is different from others, whereby mass transit sucks in most places and a car is absolutely required. And LA is a great example of that. However, right now, Waymo, Uber, Lyft, and most of the companies in the mobility sector are part of a variety of lobbying organizations. There's one called the Coalition for Safer Streets. Among the things they're lobbying for, the removal of safety standards for testing fleets and autonomy, as well as the removal of parking spots for new housing developments, which forces people into solutions and eliminates their choice of owning a vehicle, even should they want to. So let's consider this for a second. This compact that we have with the American government has with the American people is at X equilibrium point, already skewed off the norm from other, say, first world nations. If that shifts towards privatization of what previously was mass transit, I mean, the guarantees that cities give to the citizens for transportation are fairly bad, but they exist. There at least is an effort, a nominal effort to give them options, even if it's just a bus. But if you privatize, and this is where political views around transportation become totally crazy. So I believe in privatizing a lot of things, but if you remove all public options and privatize too many adjacent pieces of the mobility continuum, such that people only have private options, they don't own a car, and then you have a hurricane. So,
and then you have a group of losers.
Then you have people who cannot afford the surge pricing when a hurricane takes place. There's no guarantee from a private platform that they will eliminate surge pricing hurricane day. And, my psychology is guided by my own father, who, when the Germans bombed Brussels, he and his brother broke into the Citroën dealership and stole a hand-crank car and escaped to France and came to America, and he got into the car business. And he said to me he would never live above the third floor, because the fire truck ladders won't go that far, and he would have a car even if he was homeless.
Wow.
And I guarantee you, societal memory, cultural memory, is a lot stronger than price when your life depends on it. And I have been to Florida, I just came from New Orleans, and I've been to Texas, and there are not a lot of people down there who will give up car ownership at any price.
Because it's not just freedom, it's an escape hatch, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Got a question to your right, over here.
Please.
Could you comment on the contradiction between freedom and fun associated with having a car and driving, and the congestion and the dilapidation of mass transit? As, in fact, public transportation falling apart and congestion taking all the fun and freedom out of driving.
Is that directed at me?
It's directed to the panel.
Go, you could take a quick hit.
Part of the problem of automation and autonomy is that the language of the SAE that determine our general discussion is broken and eliminates paths of development of technologies that would resolve these problems without relinquishing control and ownership. And I'll be really quick. If you get into an Airbus, there's a flight envelope protection system. You can fly the plane under human control, but it won't let you crash. That system doesn't exist in vehicles outside of traction control and stability control. Why don't we have talk of automation augmenting human behavior and inputs and eliminating bad outputs? I turn into a wall, it turns away. No, the entire sector's discussion is around selling us options that remove human input altogether and remove that fun. So that is inherent to the mobility monetization model that eliminates human freedom.
So Rachel, let me rephrase that question for a quick answer. You've said you owned a GTR, or you had a GTR, right?
Yeah.
You live in LA, right? LA strikes me as being the last place in the world I'd want to have a GTR. Partly for the reasons this gentleman, or the issues he was just raising.
There are some places where you can drive it.
Okay. How would you respond to his question about taking all the fun out of driving?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't see cars completely going away or not ever being able to drive, but maybe I haven't thought that through enough. I do want to talk about the idea that personal freedom has to be related to ownership, because I think there are ways in which people can share a car. Not necessarily, there's a woman here from the DMV. The DMV actually makes it difficult for more than two people to be on a title. But it feels like we believe so much in the ownership of it. If you had if we could work out through algorithms and sharing and a trusted group of people that had a car, this is some of the research we've been doing, that they actually get the benefits of lower cost of ownership and the feeling that it is still their car, even though they don't have it all week, and that vehicle does not sit parked as much as it would if they just owned it. So I think there's some hybrids out there that are struggling from a business case perspective, but from the human side of it, it can be realized. So I don't know that people have to have 2 to 3 vehicles in their household fleet. I think the escape pod can be one vehicle in your garage, and explore all these other options. I mean, we do need to think about, and I come from a car company, but like reducing the number of vehicles. And in certain scenarios, for sure, we have to think about that.
So do I understand you're talking something along the lines of a fractional ownership model as being one? Okay.
Right. Which has struggled.
We're out of time, but I wanted Russell to have an opportunity to...
Just very, very quickly on it. We're talking about ride sharing. Ride sharing is still less than 1% of passenger miles traveled. It's still relatively small. What we found, the research would tell us that ride-sharing, e-hailing is actually it's taking the second car away. Right. People are keeping the first car, it's that second car if you own 2 cars or happen to own 2 cars. So again, people still want that one car, and people are 10 times less likely to do ride-sharing if they've got a young family.
And we could probably sell more GTRs if people could fractionally own them.
Yeah, I'm sure you could.
Or share other vehicles and own a GTR.
Right, exactly.
So I hope you took some at least provocative thoughts away from this discussion. I want to thank Alex Roy, Rachel Nguyen, and Russell Hensley for joining us. Thank you.